Would it concern you to discover that there's a threat hidden in the soil all around you? A threat that could potentially harm children, that enters their bones and weakens them, that disrupts the nervous system, that reduces children's IQ and shortens their attention span, and could even make them more likely to be violent criminals later in life. This threat lurking in our soils is not new. The ancient Egyptians used it to murder their enemies, and the Romans' obsession with it eventually drove them mad. Even within the last century, this threat has entered our lives through petrol, paint, and pipes. The threat I'm talking about is lead, and although it may seem like an historical issue, lead can lay protected in the soil for hundreds of years, during which time it could potentially harm our health. So what if we wanted to address this historic threat? Well, we can do that in a similar way to how detectives investigate crime. Imagine there have been several murders across a city. If you were investigating these, you might start by looking for some common factors. For example, what is similar about the location of each crime? This knowledge can then be used to predict where future crimes are likely to occur. I'm using a similar methodology, but to predict soil lead levels. First, though, I needed to know where past crimes had occurred. In other words, I needed an area where soil lead had already been studied. Thanks to the British Geological Survey, I had access to soil lead measurements from throughout Greater Glasgow. I then used computer mapping to get a complete picture of lead in Glasgow's soils. Here, you can see red areas, which indicate high levels of soil lead, and blue areas, which show where lead in soil is at its lowest. This was the evidence I needed, so I investigated what was causing this pattern. Firstly, I found that organic rich soils tended to have higher levels of lead because organic matter acts like glue in the soil, which prevents much lead from being washed away. Next, I found that soils closer to old industrial sites tended to have higher levels of lead, such as areas of shipbuilding north of the River Clyde. Lastly, I found elevated lead levels in garden soils, especially if the house next to the garden had been constructed before the 1920s, as this corresponds with the peak use of leaded paints. Currently, I'm combining together all these different lines of evidence into one computer model, which will be able to estimate lead levels in a city that has never been studied. Because importantly, once we can predict soil lead levels, we can start focusing our efforts on reducing them and stamping out this historic threat once and for all. Thank you.